Samskara. So samskara are impressions made from our previous lives. They're psychological, mental, and spiritual patterns based on our soul's previous lessons. A samskara, I always like the analogy of a tattoo. When the jivatma, which is the earthly entity, our body, it passes on, it dies. It's like a tattoo being removed. But the impression carries forward into our next incarnation like a scar after a tattoo removal surgery. Samskara and karma theory are beautifully interwoven into Jyotish, Vedic astrology, and our samskaras can be clearly shown in the Vedic astrology chart and have a deep relationship with our karmic evolution. It manifests as an evolution in 3 different aspects, what we're going to focus on today. Our previous life's wisdom, our unfinished lesson based on where we focused on in our previous incarnation, and our karmic debt. And this all manifests as both psychological, spiritual, and habitual patterns. So the soul's wisdom is the first thing that I wanted to focus on. In soul cycle or karma philosophy, our soul has a deep wisdom from its previous incarnations, and this can be understood from the Jyotish chart. This basically is what we've kind of focused on learning in our previous lifetimes and what kind of areas and aims of life we've specialized in. Every soul has certain aims and areas of life that it's focused on, and these are the areas where we have the most experience or knowledge as souls. It can have lots of different elements based on our focuses in past lifetimes. You can experience something called mastery, which means you've pretty much learned everything there is to learn about that lesson. That doesn't mean that you won't experience similar karmas, because even if you have mastered it, you'll be tested to see if you've really mastered it. Then there's wisdom, which is like, you have a good amount of wisdom on it. You've been integrating it into your soul's evolution. And there's also some instability or struggle, which means, well, just because I've been focusing on it doesn't mean that I really have learned anything at all. So an unfinished lesson is, they're on a spectrum. So our soul concentrates on learning a specific lesson, and so it begins to experience some information, and then the application of that information was his wisdom as it relates to that lesson. But again, this doesn't suggest any kind of mastery or integration of that lesson. So knowledge and then wisdom is the beginning of the integration of the lesson, but a lot of us haven't mastered it. So from a karmic philosophy perspective, until a soul has mastered any specific lesson which it's focusing on working on, it continuously reincarnates from one lifetime to the next until you've absolutely mastered that lesson. So we're going to keep coming back again and again, one lifetime to the next, until we've mastered these lessons that our soul has been working on. Often a soul and its incarnate form can have this great wisdom, but again, it can fail to show that wisdom when being tested. Like a good example is, let's say that you have this wisdom that you really shouldn't drink alcohol, but that doesn't mean that when a drink comes in front of you, you won't drink it, right? So the soul will continuously reincarnate until this wisdom that you're learning, this lesson that you're learning, can be applied to every situation and circumstance in your life, which is basically no matter what the temptation is, you don't fail or regress in the wisdom of what you've already experienced. So then karmic debt. Karmic debt, it manifests in a lot of different ways in soul cycle philosophy. But it's deeply connected to samskara, which is our previous incarnations. Karmic debt can manifest as consequences or reactions for our struggles as it relates to the specific lessons or things that we focused on. So karmic debt means, okay, your soul is promoting this kind of lesson for you, but you failed to show that you're learning that lesson or even in the working on that lesson, and so there will be repercussions from the universe for that. As we struggle with this kind of unfinished business, which is the integration of our lesson, it relates to our previous lifetime's wisdom, and it's emphasized through this karmic debt, and we have to work out those karmas in a very specific way. The karmic debt, it strongly manifests and contrasts to our previous life's focus. So usually, like if we focused on one thing in our previous lifetime, it kind of creates this unfulfilled experience or unfulfilled area in another area or aim of life. So for example, if we spent our whole life, as a housewife or as someone who's been stuck in the place of their birth their whole life, it creates this unfulfilled karmic debt to want to travel, right? To want to experience the world, to want to go to some places that you've never seen before. That's just an example of the compare and contrasting between where our soul is kind of focused on, but what kind of unfulfilled experiences that might create. I call it the karmic itch. So before we get into Ketu and Samskara, I'd like to invite the Jyotir Vidya to come in more. And we're going to do a Ketu mantra and invite Ketu to come in with us here. The mantra here is for Ketu, so if you recognize Devanagari, there's a transliteration as well. And then the Ketu yantra, which it said if you stare at the center of the yantra when performing the mantra, it amplifies its power manyfold. So we're just going to do a quick Ketu mantra before we dive into the Ketu vibe. Palas puspa shankasham takara graha mastakam radram rajatmikam goram tam ketu pranamamyaham. Palas puspa sankasham takara graha mastakam radram rajatmikam goram tam ketu pranamamyaham. Palas puspa sankasham takara graha mastakam radram rajatmikam goram tam ketu pranamamyaham. Om kram krim kram sahakitave namaha. 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 Hari Om. So just a quick translation, red like the Palasha flower, who makes the starry-eyed constellations to set. He is terrible and awesome to see, and we bow down in devotion to Ketu, who presents obstacles. We bow down to you, Ketu, who presents obstacles. We all have obstacles in our lives, right? And Ketu and Ganesha have this beautiful and divine relationship with each other. We know Ganesha as the remover of obstacles. But I like to think of them in Svarga, kind of working together in a spiritual sense, where these obstacles that are in our lives are suggestions or omens from the universe for shifts or changes that we need to make in our life. And when we've made certain changes, and we've let go of certain things, which is Ketu as the moksha karaka, it removes the attachment towards things. Then Ganesh is going to allow that obstacle to be removed and liberation to be experienced. So here's a little bit of the method. And again, it's an intuitive method, but I want you to be able to bring this home and start to tap into people's past lives. So we're going to use house position to determine samskara bhava. This doesn't necessarily say the level of wisdom. This is just how you determine which aim and which area of life in your previous incarnations you've kind of focused on. What have you been working on in a soul before this lifetime? So Ketu represents this soul's previous experience, wisdom, and areas and aims of life of concentration. We use the house position of Ketu to determine the aims and areas of life which our soul is focused on. So I call this our soul patterning. The house position or bhava of Ketu just shows which aim or area of life has been focused on, but not the level of wisdom that you're experiencing there. We're going to use something else to determine that, or specific lessons, which we use the nakshatra to determine. That is determined by those other things that I mentioned. So this is just an example of Ketu bhava. You're going to, Ketu in the 5th house, right? So this is going to show an dharma aim, right? You've been focusing on alignment to your dharma in your previous incarnations. And the areas of focus, what kind of soul patterns has your soul been experiencing? You might have had children. You might have been focusing on education. You might have creativity. And you can, this is a bhakti yoga house, so spiritual techniques and romance as well. These are just examples to determine, okay, this is the aim, dharma, and the different areas that your soul might have been focusing on in your previous incarnations. So planetary dignity is used to determine samskara evolution level. Now, this is something that I'll just say right off the bat. It can be highly debated because even some of the great rishis says that Rahu and Ketu, they don't have dignity. They're without dignity, right? So this is something where the intuitive aspect of it, the Jyotir Vidya which moves through, kind of like understanding the concept of planetary dignity, is going to use this to determine what I call the samskara evolution level, which is the lesson that you've been focused on in your previous incarnations. Where are you at with it in this life when you get to this life? So again, we traditionally understand planetary dignity relative to the sign and nakshatra that it sits in. The different conditions include exaltation, mula trikona, which is the root position, natural sign, great friend, neutral, great enemy, enemy, and debilitation. Again, this is a little bit different for Rahu and Ketu because they technically don't have dignity depending on what school of thought that you come from. So that's what I mentioned here is the Ketu's relative planetary dignity, depending on your lineage, it could be totally different. Ketu exalted in Scorpio, Ketu mula trikona in Sagittarius. You know, I had a Rahu Ketu summit with some of the other astrologers here, and we basically debated this for multiple hours. So it's one of those things where you really got to tap into your own intuition and also your own lineage or school of thought when it comes to, okay, I think Ketu does well in this sign. I think Ketu does well in this nakshatra. It's really trusting your intuition that's going to open up this method for you. But one thing that is helpful is understanding the functional relationship with sign and nakshatra rulers. It's helpful to kind of understand this, right? So we know that Ketu has like this, it's akin to Mars. I mean, even the great rishis said this. So, you know, is Ketu in a Mars nakshatra? Is Ketu in a Mars sign? These are some things to keep in mind to determine is this something that's probably in a more favorable dignity. That's just an example to kind of use that as a barometer, right? But again, you're really trusting your intuition here to kind of determine the samskara level of evolution. So here's one thing an example that I like to use. So let's say Ketu is in its own nakshatra, right? I believe that shows a deep enlightenment and wisdom in reference to the samskara evolution level. So that's a high level of mastery or wisdom along those lines as far as, okay, I not only have been focusing on this area and aim of life in my previous incarnations, but I really know what I'm doing. And the Rahu nakshatras shows that if Ketu is in a Rahu nakshatra, yeah, you've been focusing on it, but there's a lot of unfinished business there. Then when the temptation shows up or an opportunity to see if you've learned that lesson, there might be some slip and falls there, right? So, and again, we can use the other planets and the relationship with Rahu and Ketu to kind of gauge this. Is it functionally benefic friendship? What kind of dignity do you think that Rahu and Ketu have in these various nakshatras? So, the nakshatra itself, that determines the specific lessons and karmas. This is something where your knowledge of the nakshatras, your knowledge of the devatas of each of the nakshatras, your knowledge of the karmas and energies of the nakshatras, it will really help you to determine the specific lesson that when you're doing this soul cycle regression through Vedic astrology, you're going to be able to tap into it. There is a method to this, and your knowledge is going to even open up that intuitive aspect. Sometimes I like to think of it this way. The more knowledgeable you are about Jyotish, the more studied you are, the more confident you feel in your intuition, right? We experience that. So the ruling devata, as mentioned, is key to determining specific lessons here because those are the ones that are teaching the lesson. It's the devatas that rule over the nakshatras that are saying, this is the lesson that your soul needs to focus on. And each nakshatra and its devata have specific lessons and ways of teaching these lessons to you. You know, Swati is ruled by Vayu, right? You know, this is a different examples, you know. You have to be able to kind of Ashwini with the Ashwin Kumar. So you have to be able to kind of tap into the mythology and the lessons that maybe in the mythology those devatas experienced. That's one way of doing it. But another way of doing it is just chanting and opening yourself up to the Jyotirvidya. That's probably my go-to personally. So an example of using Ketu to kind of determine the samskara, let's look at Jaishta Nakshatra. So this Jaishta Nakshatra, in my research of it and also my intuition, I found that it has a very strong energy of breaking free from ancestral karmas that have been laid out energetically in our family, generation to generation. So you have to become that leader, right? That chief in like your own right, the independence that the Jaishta Nakshatra kind of pushes us to. And so the house position and the dignity will be used to determine which area, which aim of life are we breaking free from that ancestral karma that our parents kind of laid out for us, right? So let's say it's in the 10th house, right? Our family has a certain career. They were lawyers, they were doctors, you know? And so there might be this pressure. Go to law school, go to medical school. Well, if your Ketu is in there, your karma is to actually break free from that because you've actually, that's your soul's karma to kind of break free of that kind of pattern that your family has been continuously reincarnating generationally. Cool. So I have a couple case studies here, and we're going to use these kind of case studies to kind of start to apply this information. I think I have some fun case studies here for us all to look at. So Yogananda, I'm sure some of you are aware of Yogananda, believer in his teachings, right? I like using gurus for this information because they have some level of mastery or wisdom over their soul karmas. But I also will be using some human examples where they kind of failed, right? So here, as we tap into Yogananda's samskara, right, his previous incarnations, this is something where it's like, depending on your opinion, if you think that this guru has gone through Mahasamadhi, and it's funny because I use Yogananda because he was kind of against Jyotish. He actually believed that if we were truly connected to our divine self, then the grahas, they wouldn't have as much control and influence over us, right? My point is that they still do. So here we're looking at Ketu's position in Swati Nakshatra, which is ruled by Lord Vayu in the 3rd bhava. Okay, so we'll all just take a second and just before our intellectual, our monkey brain starts to try to analyze this rationally, let's just kind of see what we're feeling when we tap into our intuition here. Just going to give it a second. It's essential to the method. So, when we're looking at Ketu in Swati Nakshatra, what I kind of understand about Yogananda, and you can see this in his ancestral, in his lineage of gurus that he experienced in this lifetime, is he was always kind of growing and evolving. He was always trying to learn from his teachers. He was actually a very dedicated disciple and student of his teachers. You know, he would way rather energetically be a disciple than be a guru himself. That idea of being a guru to Yogananda, it was uncomfortable, you know? So we're seeing this kind of 3rd house position of Swati, which is Vayu, which is kind of, it's removing the Maya. It's removing the ignorance, right? So there is this kind of transcendent nature, which Yogananda has been experiencing, that from the perspective of this Ketu, he had already experienced a certain level of enlightenment, maybe not Mahasamadhi, but glimpses of Samadhi, even before his incarnation in this most previous lifetime. Because he was always willing to kind of take his guru's advice, look in the mirror, say, you know, I don't like this about myself, but I want to work on it. I want to become more sattvic. I want to improve my habits. I want to wipe away all of the things in my life that don't serve me, and that take me out of swasta, connection to my true self. This is what I've intuited and seen by seeing Ketu in Swati Nakshatra and Lord Vayu kind of trying to align Yogananda in his previous lifetimes to the best person that he can be, but not as a position as a guru himself until his most recent incarnation. And we're going to get into this when we begin to discuss Rahu a little bit more, but I just want to kind of paint a little bit of the contrasting with the unfulfilled karmic debt that Rahu kind of creates in this lifetime. So then we see Rahu, which is in Ashwini Nakshatra in the 9th house, right? The 9th house of the guru. And so in this lifetime, the tattoo, the scar that Yogananda brought into his most recent incarnation, he was immediately very devoted to some really powerful gurus, right? So he was a disciple, you know, he would probably, if you asked him, say he was a disciple his entire life. But he was like, you know, very dedicated as a student. That's that kind of samskara energy kind of like carrying forth into this lifetime. So still wanting to be a student, but that wasn't his dharma as much as, you know, as it kind of evolved in his life experience, because you're seeing a need to heal through the Ashwini position of Rahu in the 9th house. He needed to heal our suffering society. He had a very special dharma because that 9th house is the house of the guru, right? And it also is, Rahu is representing foreigners. So he came over here to the West and he brought Vedic philosophy to us to help heal our suffering souls from our disconnection with God. And, you know, energetically for his soul, if he could have stayed in India and just dedicated himself to honoring his gurus and his teachers, he might have done that. But as Rahu would have seen it, and the Ashwini Kumars, they kind of pushed him to come to the West and to teach this Vedic philosophy, and that is his karmic debt, which I believe he absolutely fulfilled within an extreme passion. I like to use Yogananda as an example of someone who really fulfilled their karmic debt in this lifetime by bringing Vedic teachings here in the West. This is me. Hi, everyone. My wife was joking. She's like, you sandwiched yourself between Yogananda and Gandhi? What's up with that? So, what can I say? But this is an example of a very human, very flawed example of trying to kind of evolve, but the struggles that we face. So as you can see, both in the chart and clearly here, I'm a Rahu ascendant with Aquarius and Satabhishak Nakshatra. So Rahu is in its own Nakshatra here.
I'm interrupting you because I want to ask you if you can lay out the chart. It's very small and hard to see, and I can't follow you. So can you just give us a basic layout of the chart?
Sure. Sure, I'll walk you through it. So I'm a Rahu Satabhishak ascendant. If you go to Mars in my 2nd house in Pisces, Jupiter's in a Vakri state, a retrograde condition in the 4th bhava, and then Ketu is in Purva Phalguni in Leo in the 7th bhav. Then I have a Venus-Moon conjunction about 1.5 degrees apart in Vishaka Nakshatra in the 9th house. And then Mercury, my Atmakaraka, is conjunct with my Sun in the 10th house, and my ruling planet Saturn is in Mula Nakshatra in the 11th. So, you know, in my experience, and I'm going to be vulnerable with you here because we're kind of, if we're an astrologer trying to help a client through their soul cycle, you got to get into the nitty-gritty. You got to be able to say, you know, these are your weaknesses, these are your strengths, and these are the things that you're working on in this lifetime, and it might take your whole lifetime to figure this out. But what's important is that you don't give up. And we have this beautiful tool of Jyotish to kind of help us with that process, to help us with that evolution. So from a past lifetime perspective, when I see Ketu and Purva Phalguni in the 7th bhava, a couple karmas have come up intuitively for me And in readings with some different astrologers, they've confirmed this intuition that I've had about myself, is that in my previous lifetimes, my soul has always kind of based who it was based on my relationships. So I was this type of this soul that I was like, I feel good about myself because I'm friends with this person, or because I'm married with this person, or because I have this, colleague relationship with this person, right? And I'll be honest, the samskara carries through into this lifetime. Does it not make me happy for some of the great friends that I have, for some of the great colleagues that I get to sit and eat with here at the Jyotish conference? It fills me up, But I've always kind of put that other person in my life first. And we have to understand that the 7th house is that house of the romantic partnership. Sometimes it kind of shows up where it's beneficial in terms of our career and our business relationships, because we know in business it's not what you know, it's who you know. But when it comes to your romantic relationships, this kind of position from a soul cycle perspective, it represents suffering. It shows an inclination here that Purva Falguni kind of carries a charismatic, magnetic energy. So I've always kind of been in relationships with people that are more powerful, more charismatic, more exciting than me. And I like that because I could kind of like lurk behind them and kind of get in the shadows and just kind of shine the light on them. And I'm a people pleaser. I like to make other people happy. At what cost has been the great question throughout my lifetime. And so that kind of previous life lesson, there's some wisdom there first, right? There's some wisdom there about what does it mean to take care of someone else. What does it mean to kind of say, what do you need? How can I help you? What can I do to take care of you, to make you feel better, right? There's something beautiful about that. And before I get into the nitty-gritty of my character defects, I just like to honor like that aspect of myself, right? So as we kind of like get more into the unfinished lesson, because if you're looking at it from that like samskara evolution level that we talked about, Ketu's in Leo, right? And there is some relationship about Ketu with the sun, right? It eclipses the sun, so there is this powerful energy. But Ketu is in Purva Falguni, right? Venus Nakshatra. So there is something where it's like there's gifts about this position, but there's a lot of romantic interpersonal struggles with this kind of position. And so, in that kind of like, putting other people first and taking care of other people, there's a lot of unfinished business there in terms of what's called a codependent relationship. And my experience as a soul throughout my lifetime is that I struggle with codependency. I've gone to meetings for it. I've worked on it with the psychologist. I've been doing everything in my life to kind of not be that person anymore. But before you can do that, you have to admit it about yourself, right? And if you're working with a client who you can see these like powerful soul patterns of like these repeated things that it's hard for them to get out of, the first thing is just exposing that to them in their consciousness. They have to want to get help to change. But sometimes it's that click, putting the popcorn kernel in the pan so that you can allow it to pop at some time when the pan gets hot enough. So that Ketu and Purva Falguni Nakshatra, it creates a huge kind of like unfinished business based on my samskara to work on my codependency in this lifetime so I can have a healthy relationship. And it wasn't until I went through the therapies and really worked on this from a psychological and spiritual level that I was able to have a fulfilling and happy relationship and marriage, which I am now experiencing. And here's something I always like to say, sometimes people see Ketu in the 7th house, they're like, been there, done that in terms of marriage because it's the moksha karaka in the 7th bhava, right? Well, I always say that it's easy to not be attached to something that you don't have. Where's the work in that? Right? There's no work, there's no growth in saying, okay, I have a codependent tendency, so I'm just never going to be in a romantic relationship. That's not going to allow you to work on that codependent tendency, but to be in a devotional, loving relationship with someone and not base your emotional condition off of their emotional condition. And to allow yourself to shine in your independence and hold space for someone without trying to change how they feel and control them. How much work and growth is in that process? I have my whole life to work on it, but I'm willing to, and I'm happily married.
Speaking as a therapist, like, you can't heal codependency if you're not in a relationship. It's impossible.
Exactly.
So it's like we have to have that agama karma, and to experience it, because like codependency is one of the top things I work on. You know, it's very common.
Yeah.
But it's like a lot of people want to avoid relationships because they're painful, but it's true. It's like if you're not in the relationship, you can't see your triggers, you can't see your stuff, so that you can heal it.
Exactly. It's the space which allows the healing to occur. So that's the soul's previous focus, the kind of unfinished business of it, which I'm working on. But what kind of karmic debt do I have based on that? And then you see my Rahu, which is, from a Bala perspective, is probably the strongest planet in my chart. So if you're looking at Rahu in its own nakshatra in the ascendant, it's like and then Jaishta kind of has this thing too in it, which is like I'm really trying to develop who I am in this lifetime and allow myself to become a leader. And it's definitely a weird, outside of the box, kind of strange leader, right? But to allow myself to develop some confidence, belief in my mystical and occult potential, belief in my own mystical and occult power through my sadhana, through my spiritual practices, and Rahu's concentration, because I believe this is an extremely strong, because Rahu is, right, co-rules Aquarius, depending on your line of thought, and then it's in its own nakshatra here at the 15th degree, so it's right in the middle of the house too. So I have no choice but to, no matter what kind of life presents itself, I have to allow myself to kind of like fall and surrender to God's will, which kind of wants me to do this Jyotish work, which wants me to do this astrological work. But sometimes when you're not used to being a leader, right, or just having any kind of confidence in yourself, you like to escape that too. That's something. So you're like, that's why a lot of these like celebrities and things like that, they have drug and alcohol problems, right? Because now all of a sudden they're at the forefront of a crowd or society, and so they want to escape that experience, and so that's been a huge lesson for me as well with this kind of fixed Rahu karma, which is a path of sobriety and recovery in my life, to allow myself to stand in front of people, but actually be totally present without the use of mood or mind-altering substances as well. So I just wanted to be vulnerable with you. So your clients, they have an opportunity to be vulnerable with you. You hold that safe space for them, and you can kind of help them work through this soul cycle stuff.
And isn't that also because Kṣaṇāti ruled by Varuna, and like in India, there's a wine that's named Varuna. There's a kind of an intoxication association with Kṣaṇāti, as well as being 1,000 flowers and healing difficult situations.
100%, 100 flowers, 100 poisons, 100 medicines, 100 toxins. So the question is, what's your poison and what's your medicine? That's been my journey. Okay, let's go to the next example. Gandhi. So we're going to tap into Gandhi's Samskara here. And when we're looking at Mahatma Gandhi's Samskara, we're seeing that Ketu is in Capricorn, in Shravana Nakshatra, in the 5th bhav. Now, this is important to understand when you're looking at Shravana Nakshatra in the 5th bhava, when I kind of tap into Gandhi's energy, you have someone who is so incredibly intelligent, an absolute genius. And from a perspective of his soul's previous experience, there's just so much dedication to education. And even in his most previous incarnation, right, he was very well educated. And so there is this knowledge. When I see Ketu in Shravana Nakshatra, I kind of think of it as a mixed dignity there, where it's like, yeah, there's this incredible amount of academic knowledge and integration of work, right? Dedication to whatever area of research that you're interested in. I believe that Gandhi has that energy without a doubt. He wants to learn something, he's going to learn everything about it until it is completely and totally learned to the most full extent. There's an absolute beautiful amount of dedication to the buddhi, to the discretionary factor of our consciousness, to be able to utilize that study of information to kind of fulfill your dharma, right? Because it's in a fifth bhava position too. Some of the unfinished samskara stuff that I saw with Gandhi is, and we all know this, there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. You can have the greatest amount of intellectual knowledge. You can learn about what's the right thing to do, you know, what kind of people are suffering in the world, right? It's in Capricorn, so it also has to do with the overcoming of adversity. Shravana, the concern for the betterment and welfare of society and people as a whole, right? There's so much knowledge there. There was so much study of that information about the plight of people across the world and a plight of his people. I do believe from the Shravana position, in his previous incarnation, in his previous samskara, he took that kind of educational information and he helped it to take care of his specific biological family, which is beautiful. Take care of your family, take care of your children, because it's in the fifth bhava, right? The ability to use your information to help educate your children, to help educate your family, so that your children can have the same opportunities that you had. There's something so beautiful about that, and I honor that about Gandhi's wisdom. But what kind of unfulfilled karmic debt does this great master have? And so now we look at Rahu's moon conjunction in Pushya Nakshatra in the 11th bhava. Pushya Nakshatra, which it kind of delineates itself as opposite from Shravana Nakshatra as more of a spiritual, more of a devotional energy to something higher, to something greater, to some kind of greater purpose. And now we're seeing it located in the 11th bhava, which has to do with our sangha, which has to do with our community, and it's conjunct with moon, which is the karaka for home. And so when you're seeing the unfulfilled karmic debt for the Mahatma, one of the things that you see is that he had to take all of his academic information, his knowledge, his education, and he had to, in a way, use it, but also kind of put it to the side so that he could fulfill some kind of higher spiritual purpose to liberate his people from the suffering that they were under, to achieve independence of India. It was such a beautiful fulfillment with that Rahu moon conjunction in the 11th house, and that also, when that's in Pushya Nakshatra, it creates a magnetism, right? So again, all of his knowledge and information, that's all and well. But in his most previous incarnations, he had some greater divine purpose through Pushya Nakshatra to kind of establish this beautiful freedom and independence and actually create a movement into the ripples of society and culture which would last way beyond his physical incarnation. So I really like using Gandhi as an example to kind of understand, you know, maybe, and one thing that we see in all three examples is that it's a lifelong journey. yeah, when you're trying to fulfill your karmic debt, you're going to have certain peaks. But even after you've fulfilled your karmic debt in your jivatma, in your physical incarnation, then that ripple of fulfilling your karmic debt, if you truly fulfill it, it carries on way beyond when your physical body dies. It sends ripples, right? Yogananda, Gandhi, they send ripples into the universe about what kind of person that we want to be, who we want to aspire to, what kind of impact we can have on the world. And that's what you get when you work through your samskara. So that's the gift that you kind of have to tap into your divine self when you're really working on evolving past your previous life's incarnation and breaking that cycle to kind of fulfill your karmic debt.
How do you explain his assassination from the position of Rahu?
So when you're looking at the assassination, and you can kind of, I don't want to get too dark, right? But let's be real. The Rahu Moon conjunction, it creates in Pushya Nakshatra some kind of favorable energy, which is like, for the people that believed in his purpose and his mission, there was nothing more attractive than that. But Rahu and Moon, it can actually create a hate. It can create an anger, because if you didn't believe in his movement, and then he represents that movement, all of a sudden he becomes the enemy. So that kind of same devotional energy, which can carry through to Pushya Nakshatra, from people that didn't believe in his movement, the people that didn't like maybe necessarily the karma that he was fulfilling, he became an enemy. He became a target as soon as he started to fulfill his karmic debt. Like a lot of other great people do, Martin Luther King, there's all sorts of examples of people that kind of represent these larger movements that are about the transformation of consciousness. But some people, they just don't want to transform. They want to fight that. But another thing which is kind of beautiful is you could remove his physical body, you could assassinate him, but his vision and his dream continues on, Let me just, what's the next slide?
No, I'm afraid to touch it.
Go ahead.
I may not be able to-
Okay, yeah, we'll just do questions because then we're going to take a little break.
Yeah, I had a question. Are you using that, based on this question, true node or mean node? And from that, because sometimes it changes, so from how, even though the nakshatra is the same, it may be the essence of the meaning of what they're trying to fulfill or move forward is the same, but the house changes, especially when it goes like from second to first or like that.
Yeah.
Is it more on like me, or is it more on the family, or is it a bit of both?
It's an awesome question, and it kind of taps into this bigger thing, which is the Jyotir Vidya, which is, again, allowing the intuition of Jyotish to kind of dominate over the intellectual academic. And again, for any of you that attained my Rahu Ketu summit with some of the other astrologers here, we debated mean node versus true node for like an hour. I believe, and I've had this with multiple clients, where run the true node, run the mean node, start to do some case studies about your experiences in your life. Does it apply in this house? Is it on this side of this nakshatra? And believe it or not, I've had multiple clients where one of them totally resonates more with the true node and one of them totally resonates more with the mean node. So it's allowing the kind of the client and your role as an astrologer to kind of create a safe space for allowing them to connect with whatever aspect they resonate with the most.
Yeah, or is it a little bit of both? Like,
It is.
Because you kind of have that knot from, like, I'm just using the me, for example, between the second and the first. It's sort of like a little bit of family causing a little bit of pain with self.
Sure.
I mean, not that it's so painful because I'm close to my family, but there's just some element to it. When with the older siblings and, when you're the youngest, whatever your scenario is, but that element of K2 is giving you that memory, that knot in your throat or that pain or that you want to get away from, but it's so close at 0 degrees. How could it not be a little bit bold?
It is, and the nodes themselves, they wobble in space. They're not actual points.
Yeah.
they're measurable points in space, and even in astronomy, they wobble, right? So it is a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Dr. Harness?
This is confirmation. I was in Alan's class because we had technical difficulties. I get a text from my wife. She goes, "Where is my Rahu? What Nakshatra? Where's my Ketu?" She's not here, so she didn't like me to talk about it. So I'll tell her when she's gone. Rahu is in Pusha in the 8th house. Her Ketu is in Shravana in the 2nd house. So and then I walk in and you're doing Gandhi's chart. Anyway.
Wow.
So it's good confirmation for you.
That's awesome
Now,
alignment.
don't tell her I said anything about her. Keep it on the DL.
It's all our secrets, right?
Whose nakshatra?
Oh, I'm sorry. There's just someone behind you.
Okay, thanks. Testing. All right. I had a question about how having planets with the lunar nodes, like specifically with one of the nodes, kind of maybe pushes the focus of the axis on that. So let's say, for an example, asking for a friend, if you say had Rahu with, if Rahu had like the Sun and Mercury in the same sign, let's say Scorpio, and K2 was on its own in Taurus, like how does that, with Gandhi's chart was the one that you showed that had the moon with Rahu, so it had a planet with Rahu, but how does like having planets with one of the nodes kind of, beyond how it affects the node itself, how does it like kind of shift the emphasis of the axis, if it does?
Love that question. It definitely shifts the emphasis. And you do want to understand, like, depending on the sign that, what were the other planets you hypothetically mentioned?
Sun and Mercury in Scorpio in the ascendant.
Okay, right. And they're conjunct with?
Rahu.
Okay, they're conjunct with Rahu. So if that's all ascending, then you're going to have, so Rahu is getting all of this other energy from these other planets. So it's going to show that it's going to promote more energy for you to kind of fulfill your karmic debt in this lifetime just because of the strength circulating around Rahu. Rahu kind of like dominates but also shares the energy, but kind of keeps it for himself, but also kind of like potentiates just the house that it's in with the other planets, especially in the condition of a stellium. So you're going to kind of see a promotion on fulfilling your karmic debt, which actually might be good in terms of you breaking free and having your chart set you up to kind of break free from your samskara. Because not only do you have Rahu kind of helping you learn the lessons associated with your ascendant, but you have those other two planets helping as well.
Thank you.
Just a clarification question. When we looked at the Rahu, Ketu, and the Nakshatra in the chart, so if in your case Ketu was in Purva Falguni, so does that indicate that in the previous lifetimes Ketu had the kind of the characteristics of Purva Falguni, or is that in this lifetime, or both?
So if you're saying, let me just clarify, that if I have Ketu in Purva Falguni in this lifetime in my natal chart, would I have it in my previous incarnations? No. You would have, well, it depends. Like, it's possible, depending on the samskara evolution level, that you could be stuck in the exact same pattern in this lifetime that you were in your previous lifetime. But most likely, in my intuitive understanding of this, that you're going to have a ton of previous, whatever your Ketu is in this lifetime, you're going to have that nakshatra totally highlighted in your hypothetical previous lifetime chart, but it won't be the same position. It'll be another planet, because you didn't learn it with that other planet, which is why Ketu is showing up in this lifetime.
Oh, so another planet was in Purva Falguni.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. Like, for example, if it's in Leo, maybe it was the sun.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Barry.
Kṣaṇāti, so I always think of K2 in the first being more codependent than K2 in the seventh. I mean, they always go together. I mean, so I was a little surprised when you were sharing your own experience about that. What would you say about that?
Right, so they're always aspecting each other. So either Rahu or Ketu on the 1-7 axis will show codependency, you know. The codependency with a Rahu ascending has a more narcissistic tendency.
Okay.
And the Ketu ascending has more of a codependency in more of like depressing, lonely
Right.
kind of way. More of like an abstinence. Any other questions?
I don't even know how to phrase this. From personal experience and working with many clients, for me, I'm also in Rahu Dasha, but I love looking into what we're here to learn, that access of what we came in having mastered or having repeatedly, hit our head against that karmic lesson, and to learn what we're coming in to embrace. From many experiences, as with your journey, that until we can fully learn and step into that Rahu constellation, we cannot receive and fully appreciate the South Node experience. And to, I guess maybe you could talk a little bit more about receiving that. I mean, it's interesting. I have my Rahu in Aries as well, and my Ketu in Libra in the 5th house. So you brought up examples, and so I also have experienced some codependency to learn to lean into my Aries, to receive that full circle in relationships. So I don't know if you have more to share about that lesson of really leaning into the North Node.
Yeah.
Or experiences with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful question. Maybe it's best to speak from personal experience. Until I worked on my codependency, until I got sober, until I developed a confident dedication to my sadhana, I was not able to have a healthy relationship. It's like the old adage, to love yourself is to be able to love and have a healthy relationship with someone else. But if you don't believe in the divine within you, if you're not allowing yourself to treat your body like a temple, which is divine, then how can you let someone else even treat you that way? It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel comfortable. How can you treat me as if I'm something great when I can't even honor and treat myself or believe in myself as something great either? So that's just my experience.
Beautiful, thank you.
Cool. In the back?
I have questions about where in the texts you might find any, like the traditional texts where this information might be found, or if this is something that it's your tool that you developed. Also, remedies.
Yeah, so I have, after we go into Rahu, then I have multiple slides specific to remedies for Rahu and Ketu. Okay. So that's going to be at the tail end. This method is not in any of the ancient texts. I was taught it from my guru about the Jyotir Vidya, and the position of Ketu representing our Samskara and Rahu. But there's not anything specific about this nakshatra represents this past lifetime. Quite frankly, this is an area of uncharted territory in Jyotish.
Sorry, I'm brand new to Jyotish. Ketu represents the Samskara, Rahu represents, just so I can make it very clear in my mind.
What's that?
So Ketu represents Samskara, Rahu represents
Karmic debt.
Karmic debt, okay. I just want to make sure I have that clear.
But there's such a...
I know it's nuanced,
but they're also so interrelated, right?
So they go back and forth to make that relationship clear between the two nakshatras.
Yeah. Evolution is harmony between the two spaces of, integrating the lessons that you've learned in your past lifetimes, but then fulfilling your karmic debt in this lifetime, which is the integration of your samskar. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just want to know which one to look
Yeah.
to start.
Yeah.
To piggyback a little bit on what she was saying, I was wondering, when you talk about Ketu being the samskaras, what indicates the vasanas, the grouping of samskaras?
Yeah, the vasanas are created relative to the dignity, well, the functional dignity of Ketu. So, you know, the patterns and habits, if they're in like a, let's say Ketu, in your opinion, is in an unfavorable position, then those impressions are just concurrently repeating without any level of growth or wisdom. You know, if let's say Ketu is in its own nakshatra, in a position of high dignity, it might show your ability and natural inclination to have already broken free from it, but you still will be tested on it again in this incarnation to see if you've really done the work. What's the timing? Does anyone have the time? Okay.
Do you have a book, is this in a book that you wrote?
No, but I am writing a book about it right now. Dayananda mentioned it. I am writing it. It's all over my YouTube too. If you email me, I'll send you a copy. Cool? All right, so just because I want to have time, because we have all sorts of examples in the second half, we're going to go eat the moon. Eat the sun like Rahu here. And we'll be back in, let's say, 10 minutes, okay? Hello? There we go.
Yeah.
Cool.
And now this works too.
Awesome.
Okay.
Love you, bro.
Yeah.
All right, everyone.
These are three different patterns. So they lose the connection on it. You might want to.
Okay. I need a new laptop. All right, everyone, settle in. All right, so now we're going to tap into Rahu and our karmic debt. So let's invite Rahu into our space. So we'll start with an Om, and then if you know the Rahu Sutra, please join. If you prefer just to meditate, that's fine as well. Ardakaya Mahaviryam Chandraditya Vimardinam Simhita Garbha Sambutam Tam Rahu Pranamam Yaham. Ardakaya Mahaviryam Chandraditya Vimardinam Simhita Garbha Sambutam Tam Rahu Pranamam Yaham. Ardakaya Mahaviryam Chandraditya Vimardinam Simhita Garbha Sambutam Tam Rahu Pranamam Yaham. Om Brahm Brim Ram Saharahave Namaha. Om Brahm Brim Brahm Saharahave Namaha. Om Brahm Brim Brahm Saharahave Namaha. Om Brahm Brim Brahm Saharahave Namaha. Hari Om Om Namah Shivaya. Jai Durga. So it's a similar method to we applied, so we'll be able to get into more examples, but just a little bit of a difference when we're trying to understand the Samskara debt bhava and evolution versus the karmic debt bhava and evolution. So again, Rahu represents our unfulfilled karmic debts, what we really need to focus on. It shows what itch our soul has never properly or fully scratched. And it yearns to be experienced in the current incarnation. It inherently lacks experience and concentration. So we use the house position of Rahu to determine the aims and areas of our life our soul yearns to achieve and experience in this life. So again, the house position of Rahu, which area and aim of life really yearns to be fulfilled, really yearns to be experienced. It just shows the house position of Rahu, just the aim and area of life. It doesn't show your level of wisdom there or what specific lessons are coming up in that area, just the focus, like what's the area, what's the goal. An example, so if Rahu is in the 7th house, depending on some other positions, you might have an itch to get married, right? That's simple. Interpersonal relationships, business agreements, partnerships, a relationship with someone other than yourself.
Can we go just a little deeper on that? Just because I was wondering, because it is the realm of obsession, right? And so Rahu in the 7th, to me, like the fear, like the resistance, like a cat to water, is like, well, what if I settle? Oh my God! And now, because of the mind of the head of the dragon is always wanting better and more and higher evolution. What if I get that more? What if I want something different? What if I become a different person and he doesn't come with me? Oh my God! So there's a sense of resistance to that.
Wherever Rahu is, there will be resistance there because your soul has very little experience with it. And we know oftentimes in our spiritual evolution, fear is our greatest enemy. It's our greatest obstacle. Doesn't mean that it's easy to conquer. It doesn't mean that because Rahu is there, we will conquer it, or even we will get there. But it shows we should try. So the planetary dignity, we use that to determine the debt evolution level. This is a planet's relative condition to sign, nakshatra. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with exaltation, debilitation, friend, enemy. And again, as mentioned, same with Ketu, the dignity of Rahu is a widely debated and heavily argued topic. So I want you to allow the Jyotir Vidya and your own lineage as well as your own intuition to align with whatever resonates with you. We just kind of use it as a barometer. But it's helpful to understand functional relationships. So, Rahu is akin to Saturn. So Rahu in a Saturn nakshatra, Rahu in a Saturn sign. Rahu does pretty well with Venus and Mercury. So that's just something to consider, when Rahu with Sun, Rahu with Moon, that might not be quite as favorable as a functional dignity perspective to understand our karmic debt. So, for example, Rahu in its own nakshatra, it shows a deep karmic and intense draw towards manifesting inexperienced karmas in the current incarnation. What I kind of mean by that is that you can't escape this karma. If Rahu is in its own nakshatra, you are going to have to experience some lessons there. While if, let's say, Rahu is in a Ketu nakshatra, it shows a need to experience it, right? But maybe not as intensely, because eventually, due to Ketu being the moksha karaka, you're going to have to move away from it. So maybe you experience it, but it's not as like a permanent, lifelong, lasting thing. You experience it and then move away from it. Like a marriage, and then you get divorced, and then you never want to get remarried again. So you experience it, but then you move away from it. And for the other planets, we use our intuition as well as the functional relationships. The nakshatra is used to determine specific debt karmas. This is associated with the nakshatra devatas, the ruling deity over the various nakshatras, as well as the lessons and of energies of each of the nakshatras. The Jyotir Vidya is key here, the intuition which moves through you. So, for example, let's say you have Rahu and Satyabhishak Nakshatra in the 8th house. This will activate a huge karmic debt towards experiencing healing on a road towards mystical, occult, and esoteric evolution. This might cause a wounded healer vibration, right? Rahu in its own nakshatra in the 8th house, wounded healer, classic. To experience, so how do you become a healer? You got to heal yourself. So in this case, the native has drug and alcohol issues. and it leads them on a path towards spiritual evolution as well as sobriety and recovery. Therefore, they're kind of fulfilling that karmic debt. And when they get over the other side of that, separation from the detox, they start to develop a direct connection with the God of their understanding. So we're going to get into some Rahu characters here with the Rahu karmic debt. And I'm a big fan of Amy Winehouse. Do some people here like her music? Okay, great. She's a great example. And if you've listened to some of her music and read through some of the lyrics of her music, you'll see a lot of this stuff play out. So when we're looking at the perspective of Amy's samskar, her previous incarnations, right? We have Ketu in Jaishta Nakshatra, conjunct with Guru in the 7th bhav. Now, this again is debatable, but many astrologers believe to be Ketu exalted in Scorpio. It at least is incredibly strong here. It has some strength. So when you're looking at this position of Amy's chart, there's a lot of samskara for her in terms of what we just talked about with me, codependent relationships. And due to Jupiter being in this position and in Scorpio, there's that Ketu and Jupiter relationship, which, I mean, it's definitely something that's kind of outside of the box to understand. We can't really say that it's bad. We can't really say that it's good because it's never so black and white with the nodes, right? But in this position with Ketu and Jupiter, there is almost, because Jupiter represents the spouse, while there's codependency that shows up here, what I've kind of intuited from looking at Amy's chart is there's an obedience from her samskara in her previous lifetimes. There's this subservience, right, to the guru, which in this case was her romantic partner. So there is a total, on the wisdom side of it, there's like an honoring of your partner. I respect what your opinions are. I respect what you have to say. You know, the dark side of it is like what you say goes, and what you want for me, well, it doesn't matter what I want for myself because that's what you want for me. You know, there's this putting all of your power and all of your energy into kind of like making the other person happy. And so from a samskara perspective, I don't believe that before her most recent incarnation, she ever really allowed herself to find herself, you know, to become her own independent self. Because, right, Ketu is in Jaishta Nakshatra, which kind of represents the development of some level of independence. So her soul has this huge, you know, samskara experience of needing to become independent. But due to the subservient energy between her and her spiritual partner, it was never experienced. So then we kind of see Rahu, through its position of the unfulfilled karmic debt in this lifetime, exalting itself as it's ascending. Again, it's debatable whether Rahu is exalted in Taurus. Many astrologers believe that Rahu is exalted in Taurus and Ketu is exalted in Scorpio. I'm a Rahu Aquarius, so I kind of favor Aquarius, but there is this kind of energy where it's strong. But when you have a malefic with so much strength, is that really something that's going to be enjoyable? But without a doubt, when we're looking at Rahu and Mrigashira, there is a constant of like Mrigashira being the seeking nakshatra and really trying to figure out like who I am and what's my purpose in this lifetime, and in a really expressionary, action-oriented nature. But the unfulfilled karmic debt for Amy was to become famous, was to become successful, to manifest her creative power, but to not let some of the other temptations in her life, which is the darker side of Rahu, as well as her unhealthy and codependent relationships, which are showing up as a samskara in the 7th bhava, take away from this potential for her to become a successful star. And it isn't so black and white for Amy, right? Because we know for in fact that she did become very successful. She's known as one of the greatest singers of our generation by many. But she's not here anymore, you know? She had many partners who were physically addicted to opiates and abused them to a very extreme extent. And whenever they did, she did too. Because there's this defaulting to my partner, and that, doesn't matter in my mind what my barometer of right and wrong is. I'm going to err to this position of power towards my partner. So regardless of where I am at in my sobriety, my partner relapses, let me join, and that ended up being her demise, because whenever a romantic relationship became unstable, and due to this kind of Ketu Jupiter position in the 7th house, on top of the success, she really wasn't able to develop a healthy romantic relationship in this lifetime. So whenever they went wrong and her partner relapsed or they separated, she would go back into her active addiction. What's interesting about Rahu in such a fixed, exalted position ascending is even though she couldn't break free of her samskara, right? Because the samskara evolution level here is really powerful. But it's also kind of like from a functional perspective here, an exalted node might not be something where it's enjoyable. So from that perspective, like she repeated all of the same lessons in this lifetime that she did in her previous incarnations. But it didn't prevent her from becoming successful. It didn't prevent her from becoming famous. It didn't prevent her from becoming prosperous. But she could never feel confident in herself on the public stage. She kind of felt like a normal person on some extent, but everyone was seeing her as Amy Winehouse, the future of soul. And that put pressure on her to seclude and engage in addictive substances. And, she's not with us anymore today. But I like using her example very strongly because despite her not conquering the lessons of her samskara, it still allowed her to tap into her karmic debt. But I believe that, like, hypothetically speaking, she'll come back again and be famous and successful. But this time she'll be able to stay sober and to have a healthy relationship to kind of fulfill that karmic pattern. Mata Amritanandamayi, my guru. So it's a funny story because I was like talking to my Jyotish teacher, Mahadev, and I was like, Mahadev, like, can I look at Amma's chart? Because like she's gone through like Mahasamadhi and she's here out of her own volition. So is it even like appropriate? And he's like, go ask her. So like I went to visit her and I was like, Amma, like, I'm an astrologer, like, can I look at your chart? She's like, I know, no problem, go ahead. So it's like, all right, so here we are. So I have her permission, in case you're wondering. This isn't like some forbidden thing. So from the perspective of looking at Ketu's position in Pusha Nakshatra in the 10th bhava. Now, I believe this to be like, from at least a dignity perspective, to have like some kind of discomfort. You know what I mean? The energy of the 10th house permeating through Pusha, it showed, and when Amma was born, like when she was a very young child, they immediately recognized her as divine, as a guru teacher, and in her early adolescence, they were honoring her as a guru. So it was something that, from the perspective which Pusha is representing, this kind of devotional energy and the power of our spiritual wisdom, is kind of manifesting itself in her 10th house, which is a career life purpose, right? So from a samskara perspective, it's just interesting to talk about this as a condition, because I believe that Amma is here, but she has already fulfilled all her karmic debt and experienced the full mastery and wisdom of all of her samskaras. So we're just looking at someone who's done a perfect job at this, which is really cool. Which means the lines are going to be blurred between Rahu and Ketu, because she's already mastered the wisdom of Ketu and fulfilled her karmic debt of Rahu before this lifetime. So you might as well just switch them with each other. It's really far out. So from that life purpose of Ketu position in the 10th house, her life purpose, having this devotional energy and being seen on the public stage as an embodiment of the divine. And we can see that as Ketu being in Pushya Nakshatra. And here's something as well, which I like to mention in this chart. The 10th house is an Artabhava house. For those of you who know Amma's service organization, you know how much money she's raised. She has put toilets all throughout India. She has created schools for people that are unfortunate. This is an energy where it's part of her devotional energy and her divine energy that manifests financial accumulation and strength through the 10th house. So it's this kind of position where there's this divine spirit that is actually here help to provide this great service and benefit to humanity. And we live in the yuga that we live in, and you're going to need money to do that. And that's why one of the reasons why she's here, to provide service in a selfless way where other people would keep it selfishly for themselves. Looking at the unfulfilled karmic debt, which in this case is fulfilled, little catch-22, we see Rahu and Uttarashada in the fourth bhava. This representing the soul's direction and the soul's potential in the fourth house as it relates to the home. And I do like Rahu and Capricorn, right, because of that functional akin relationship between Rahu and Saturn. So we are kind of seeing here an energy in which in her homeland there's a karmic debt to kind of bring a new spirituality and a mysticism to it. And, you know, she has many ashrams all throughout India, including in Kerala, which is, you know, where she spends most of her time. And it brings people towards this mystical devotion of the Divine Mother when they're in her presence in India. But we know that Rahu also represents the foreign and exotic. So to many of us Westerners, Amma is one of the premier gurus that we experience from India here in the United States. She goes on a world tour of Canada, of the East Coast, of the West Coast, and everywhere in between, and sits there and she comes and she hugs you. And she blesses you with this divine darshan in the fourth house of the mother, in the fourth house of the unconditional love, in the fourth house of the home. And she's bringing this divine love of the mother to us in the West, which, not to like get too political, but coming from a Judeo-Christian history in the West, God is some dude in the sky, you know? So we need that healing here to experience the divine as feminine. And I believe that's her debt, but in this case, her blessing to give us that. The Uttarashada is pushing the maximum potential of that direction. So like no matter, like there's no one who would ever question the divine feminine nature of Amma, but like she continuously manifests those energies in a deeper way, constantly growing, right? Because she can manifest all of the different energies of Divine Mother. I mean, personally, I think she prefers Kali. But you can see her as Lakshmi, you can see her as Saraswati, you can see her as Parvati, you can see her as all the manifestation of the Divine Mothers, because Uttarashada is that whole spectrum of different manifestations. Pope Francis, okay. So Pope Francis, this is an interesting example. I hope I don't offend anyone, but I kind of do. So when we're looking at Pope Francis, we're seeing a nodal 1-7 axis. We're seeing Ketu and Mrigashira ascending. And now look at that powerful stellium with Rahu in the 7th bhav. So, you know, Ketu and Mrigashira, and I think you asked the question earlier, which is like, okay, what kind of dominance does it fall to when one of the nodes is conjunct all these other planets? And this, you can see a huge amount of karmic debt to fulfill in this lifetime for our Pope. So Rahu is conjunct Sun, Jupiter, and Mercury in Mula Nakshatra. And if you know, due to Guru Chandal Yoga, Rahu and Jupiter's relationship is, you know, it's again never black and white, but it's not considered particularly auspicious. And Rahu is also conjunct with the Sun, and it's within 1 degree of there. So you're seeing a very intense eclipse of Rahu on Sun. If there's any saving grace to this, even though it's 17 degrees away, Rahu and Mercury kind of getting along there. So there's this language gift that he possesses, and he continues to express this kind of gift of language. So when you're looking at this kind of position for his previous lifetime in Mrigashira, we honor the wisdom of Pope Francis as being a powerful mystic. Ketu and Mrigashira Nakshatra and Mars Nakshatra pushing him to a mystical and occult potential. And listen, it's not like there's any pope who's not dogmatic. But of all of the popes that we've ever experienced in the history of humanity to this day, he's the least. So I like to think of consciousness as evolving, even if it's slowly. So there is this perspective of this mystical pope that's here to serve his dharma as a mystical pope. And this is only through knowledge and education of the Old Testament, the New Testament, you know, the teachings of Christ. And he has done his best, given his lineage, to embody this energy, right? And no one's perfect. You know, I'm not talking about the Pope Francis have going through Mahasamadhi and being here on his own volition. But I'm honoring him as a mystical and occult leader of the Catholic movement that we have not experienced to history and Catholicism before. And where does that come from in terms of the karmic debt? So you're seeing Rahu with the Sun and Jupiter and Mercury all in the 7th bhava in Mula Nakshatra. Mula Nakshatra, which has to do with Nariti, the goddess of death and destruction. And see, one of the things that's happened with Catholicism is that it's lost its interest to a lot of the younger generations because it seems very old school, it seems very closed-minded. You know, there's biases towards certain groups of people for the practices that they believe in. You know, you all know what I'm talking about.
And a lot of association to molestation, which is Mrigashira.
Right, right. Definitely, you know. So there is this energy, though, due to Mula, which it is his part of his karmic debt. The question is, it's in Sagittarius with Jupiter. So I don't believe that in this lifetime, that what he's trying to do, he will totally fulfill it. But I believe that he's starting to, and it's his karmic debt to break away from dogma in the Catholic religion. Which is saying due to Rahu's position with Sun and Jupiter, Mercury, the Rahu-Jupiter position, the popes that came before him, and the popes that came before him, and the popes that came before him, that said this and that was wrong, well, they were doing it behind closed doors, right? And now you have someone who's saying, well, maybe it's not so black and white. Maybe we should invite those people to still practice Catholicism and, you know, because he has to do this weird kind of like thing where he's like trying to like not get in trouble from the Catholic community, but also trying to make it more appealing to the masses, to the people that have walked away from Catholicism because it's too closed-minded and too dogmatic. So I believe that his karmic debt is painful and it's uncomfortable, but I think he's doing the best job that he can. Sure, right? Jupiter's in a Mula Trikona here, right? So he's trying his best. He's trying to break away free from these kind of like old concepts of what does it mean to be Christian, you know, regardless of some things that you're born with, you know? So that's the Pope.
Well, wait a second, I have a question, because, you know, Dalai Lama also has a similar North Node in the 7th house, although in Capricorn in Western structure. And I was, you know, what I don't like about the quote Pope and the vertical alignment is that he doesn't teach us to integrate and master the 5 illusions of anger, you know, with mastering yourself. And so if you're in a relationship with the church, can't you be a vertical upright connection to show the world how to also relate to marriage and relationship? You know, why couldn't he, maybe could that be perhaps part of his dharma too?
It is.
Excuse me, if we have a question, please raise your hand and we'll come up with a mic.
Okay.
So our Zoom friends can hear.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I think we'll just,
His own house in the night, so he can't help himself.
yeah. And here's the thing, you know, again, in many ways, I believe he's ahead of his time and is only going to be able to do what the political structure allows. Religion is still a political thing. You know, it's not supposed to be, but that's the time that we live in. So we'll get to more questions. I took some examples from the crowd and I want to get into them. Taylor. Hey, bro. This is Taylor, everyone. Taylor volunteered his chart information. So Taylor is a Libra ascendant. And Taylor's nodal axis is on the 4-10 split with the Ketu conjunction with Jupiter in a Vakri state or retrograde condition in the 10th bhava in Pusha Nakshatra and Rahu in Uttarashada. Wow, Uttarashada is really showing up today, huh? So, from the perspective of, we just looked at a similar position. So when we're understanding some of the samskara, some of the previous life energy of Taylor, we have to understand that in Pusha Nakshatra, it shows that his soul is inherently devotional. He is someone that is coming from a perspective of wanting to believe in something greater than himself. Jupiter's retrogression here in conjunction with the Ketu is saying that, well, just because you tell me to believe in it, it doesn't mean I should believe in it. I need to do some research, I need to do some investigation, and if it resonates with me, then maybe I can start opening up to the idea of having faith or belief in it. There's a questioning of the guru, not because he doesn't want to believe in the guru, but because that's how he's going to get to some truth there. And there is a devotional energy of like love for the family and wanting to be dedicated to the family. But due to the Vakri state or retrograde condition of Jupiter and it being in Pusha, his family might have like be coming from a certain like religious background, and due to the conjunction of Ketu with the retrograde Jupiter, he like wants to honor his ancestors, but it's his lesson to be like, you know, just because I was born this religion, just because I was raised this religion, doesn't mean I believe it. And I definitely don't believe in it in the rules and the laws and the regulations of it. Maybe there's some mysticism to it, but the way that y'all practice it, that's not how I experience that. So there is kind of a liberation of that natural mystical devotional nature, but through investigation, finding it in a way that kind of resonates for him. And this will manifest in some type of career that kind of breaks free from his family's samskara, as far as like what his family has practiced, what his parents did, what his grandparents did. They might have conformed to society or certain things in some way to do what they thought was right. And Taylor has this powerful samskara to kind of break free of that pattern and to be true with what resonates with him. And then when you're looking at the unfulfilled karmic debt, you're seeing Rahu in Uttarashada in Capricorn here, which in this position, when you're looking at the comparing and contrasting between the 10th house and the 4th bhava, if he's going to like fulfill this kind of like being true to himself and a life purpose and career that resonates with him, he's got to break free from the home. And he's got to go towards a new definition of family, and a new definition of spirituality that kind of resonates with him. And one of the things is with that Rahu representing materiality in the 4th house of moksha, he has to be willing as a karmic debt to kind of sacrifice wealth if he wants to be fulfilled in the deepest way as possible in this lifetime. Catch-22 of that is if he does kind of sacrifice wealth, which is like, okay, I don't really need to make money. I'd rather be happy doing what I need to do in my life, the inner emotion, fourth house, being true to my heart. Then at some point when the dasha in transit is appropriate, it will bring him material wealth and prosperity as well. How's that all sitting with you, Taylor?
It's pretty accurate. I come from a Christian upbringing, typical Midwestern upbringing, and when I moved out here, it was pretty much the leap into what you were mentioning about, embracing more an Eastern philosophical perspective, and what you were touching upon Jupiter regarding the investigation. Also pretty accurate about, the guru. Jiddu Krishnamurti is something his Truth is the Pathless Land is something I resonate very deeply with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How are we doing on time? Does anyone have the time? Okay, we'll get some more examples in. Kayla, are you here? Hi, Kayla. Thank you for volunteering your chart. You still want us to do it? Okay, cool. So from Kayla's perspective on her chart, we have something which I always find exciting to see. Ketu and Rahu's Nakshatra and Rahu and Ketu's Nakshatra, right? So this is something that it's a great example to use to kind of understand things in the method. So we're seeing that Rahu is in Mula Nakshatra in the second bhava, and that Ketu is in Ardra Nakshatra in the eighth bhava. So Ardra, right? Rudra, Shiva's fierce form, Ketu in the eighth house in Ardra Nakshatra. From a spiritual samskara perspective, whenever Ketu is in a Rahu Nakshatra, it shows that there's a huge amount of unfinished business with this lesson of samskara, right? Because it's something that really, even though you've already experienced it as a soul, you're going to experience it consistently throughout this lifetime as well, even though maybe you should prioritize Rahu. But it's still one of those things where it's going to be right neck and neck with your Rahu karma as well. From a perspective of this position, when I see in connection to Rudra Devata, it's a renunciation. From your previous life perspective, your samskara was that of a renunciate. I don't want anything to do with money, society, marriage. These things are illusions. These things are Maya, and I know I don't want to be attached to them. And so why even go towards them? It's just going to take me away from my relationship with God. It's just going to take me away from my relationship with myself. There's an analogy I like to explain about this kind of position. The apprentice has been focusing on enlightenment their whole life, and they've developed these great esoteric and mystical gifts in which they're always connected to their divine consciousness, and they have a deep understanding of moksha, and they've even had glimpses of samadhi throughout their lifetime. They've experienced these brief glimpses of enlightenment. I believe that you're like one of these souls that could have experienced this kind of temporary enlightenment in their previous incarnation through their mystical approach. And so then the Atma leaves the Jivatma, right? The soul leaves the physical body, and it goes up to Svarga, to the celestial dimension, to the Paramatman. And it says, I've focused my whole life on moksha, and I'm ready for my Mahasamadhi to end the cycle of reincarnation. And the Paramatman says, go get a job. So you're reincarnated back. And this is where we see Rahu's karma, which is in Mula Nakshatra, which is saying like there's so much wisdom spiritually inherent within your soul. But it was like with that wisdom, it was not shared, right? And Rahu's in Mula Nakshatra, it can represent the wisdom that you have about experiencing things, but like maybe not letting them control or rule you or be attached to them in the deepest sense, there's some material purpose for you to fulfill. There's that gift that you have of your wisdom that you've learned, and you have some kind of karma to like share that gift and to develop some kind of income and artha bhava, financial prosperity and success with that gift that you inherently have, because that gift is better shared with others. And it's one of those things where it might be your inclination that when, you know, good things come to you in your life, you know, a lot of people like let them control them and dominate them and rule them. I don't believe that that's your nature. You know, you can kind of like just let those things go. And that's such a gift to teach other people that. So how's that resonate with you?
Very much so. Yeah, I've always been that kind of person where they're like, oh, you're so young, you know, where it's just I know a lot of things, and, you know, I don't claim to know everything, but it just, things will come out of my mouth. I'm like, how did I learn that, you know? And yeah, I definitely feel that like big call where it's like, I need to share this with people. So, and that, yeah, that like disconnect from materialism, it's like, I find that like, as much as I enjoy the adornments of life, you know, I can release them as fast as I can obtain them as well.
Yeah, I also like to say about this kind of position that like once you've shared that gift and achieved your prosperity in this material world, you will automatically be enlightened.
Thank you.
Cool. Let's just hold it to the, is it quick?
Yeah, quick.
Okay.
So what's the significance of Ketu being in the nakshatra of Rahu?
So yeah, so when Ketu is in a Rahu Nakshatra, it shows that the samskara that you have, you already have like a ton of like wisdom in that area, which in this case is moksha. But Rahu is saying that you have to concentrate it on again because it serves some higher purpose. So like in this case, like there's already a deep mystical kind of enlightened soul here, but that mystical wisdom that she has, due to it being in Rahu's nakshatra here, she has a lot of debt to do something with it.
And then if Ketu is in Ketu's nakshatra, what would that imply?
That would actually show something a little bit different, where you have wisdom and maybe you kind of dance with that wisdom, but it's double moksha, right? Moksha karaka thing. So it's like, okay, this has been my samskara, and I might be tested if I learn that lesson, but I really don't want to focus on it. I have other things. That will usually push towards Rahu as being the thing that you need to focus on. It's like with the double Ketu, it's like been there, done that. Okay, so we should have time for one or two more examples. Myra? Hi. You still want us to do your example?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is a little bit of a reversal of the chart that we just looked at, which is interesting. So, because now it's almost like an exact reversal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I swear I didn't plan that. So now we have Rahu in its own nakshatra in the 12th bhava and in Ardra, and we have Ketu in its own nakshatra of Mula in the 6th bhava. It's a perfect comparing, contrasting, and Ketu is conjunct with its akin partner Mars. And while the dignity is higher here, many astrologers believe that Ketu's Mula Trikona or exaltation position, Sam Jeppy believes this, is strongest in Sagittarius, and that Rahu is strongest in Gemini, right? So there's some like favorable dignity here that's really powerful. Now, Ketu's conjunction with Mars in Mula Nakshatra, it shows that from a past lifetime perspective, there's like a very hardworking person. Someone who puts in the time and puts in the effort. But the sixth house position, especially when Ketu is positioned there, it's like kind of getting stuck in like a 9 to 5, 40-hour per week like work week. Because yeah, it's like making money and I'm like busy or whatever, but it's not like nourishing or fulfilling you on like a deep soul level. Maybe it pays the bills, you know, and maybe it's better than nothing, but it's like lacking that kind of, so like from a samskara perspective, it kind of shows this lesson, which is like money is really not what life is about. Like you need money, you know, to like pay the bills or whatever, to come to the Sedona conference. But you don't need it for much more. And at what cost do you put your life in to work that extra hour, to work that extra day? At what cost to your spiritual well-being, which is Rahu in its own nakshatra in the 12th bhava. Also, from the 6th house perspective, it's one of those things where if you overwork yourself in like your regular day-to-day life, it's going to have a huge negative impact on your physical health and on your energy, where it's like your body will immediately let you know that you're working too much, because you'll just want to like crawl in a hole and chill. You know, so that K2 position is like really kind of saying, okay, I basically want to like make some money and have a job, but I need to work like the bare amount possible just to get by so I can do the things in life that make me happy, because I need money to do those things, but I don't need more than that. And to see that kind of unfulfilled karmic debt, which is Rahu is really going to push you. And one of the beautiful things I love about seeing Ketu in its own nakshatra and Rahu in its own nakshatra here is saying, if you kind of like just do the bare minimum to make yourself like comfortable in the material world as far as your regular day-to-day job goes, Rahu in its own nakshatra in the 12th house is going to give you spiritual dreams. Spiritual experiences, transcendent experiences, and mystical knowledge beyond your greatest dream. It's like if you create the space away from the hustle and bustle of your day-to-day job to allow yourself to like study astrology and go to travel some places that you're interested in, Rahu and Rudra and Ardra Nakshatra are going to reward you with incredible mystical and occult potential. How's that resonate with you?
That sounds awesome. Thank you.
Cool. So does anyone have the time? So I should probably start fielding questions. Do we want to do the Zooms first?
Sure. From the earlier session.
I threw you on there. I didn't know, you know.
This is from Roxanne on Zoom. This was back to the Yogananda chart, the issue of Ketu in Rahu Nakshatra of Swati and Rahu in Ketu's Nakshatra of Ashwini. Is there any significance you see to this? Is it considered Parivritana Yoga?
Dana Yoga?
She said it would look like Parvritana.
Oh, Parvritana Yoga.
Yeah.
Okay. Parvritana Yoga between, which planets did she mention?
It was the Rahu Ketu. The issue of Ketu in Rahu Nakshatra of Swati and Rahu in Ketu's Nakshatra of Ashwini.
So that's groundbreaking, because we technically don't use Nakshatra exchange to understand a Parvritana Yoga. We do Rashi exchange. But that's tapping into this method, which is, yeah, when you have an exchange between a Rahu and a Ketu Nakshatra and Ketu and a Rahu Nakshatra, it's almost like a Kalasarpa yoga. It's like kind of another version of what we understand as a Kalasarpa yoga, because regardless of all of the other energies in your chart, Rahu wants to experience that karma in a Ketu nakshatra, then move away from it. Ketu needs to be tested if it learns those lessons and then move away from it. So it's one of those things from a karmic pattern perspective, it's somewhat inescapable and might dominate the life of the native.
One more. How does going through the dasha period of either Ketu or Rahu impact your experience with them?
Cool. So I have some dashas here. Okay. So Taylor, we're just going to throw you up because I threw your dashas on here. So the Rahu Dasha is being activated with his karmic debt because he's currently running his Rahu Dasha, his Venus Antardasha. So whenever the Dasha is activated, whether it's Ketu, Rahu, when the Rahu Dasha is active, it's that most concentrated time period in your life for you to understand what your karma to experience in this lifetime is and to start walking towards it. The issue of Rahu is it can create the Maya, it can create the illusion. So you could be walking to it, but Rahu is the head without no body, and it's experiencing its karma and has no idea. When am I full? When is my appetite satisfied? But I like to think the proof is in the pudding, and to, Rahu somewhat having a pragmatic approach as remedial, that this perspective of kind of during Taylor's Rahu Dasha, focusing on a new geographic location and a focus on a mystical and occult path outside the one that his parents left for him, it's being activated through his Dasha, where after the Rahu Dasha is complete, and he goes into his Jupiter Dasha, it's going to activate his 10th house, right? So it's like he's this period of aligning to his karma before it develops into some kind of like powerful career and life purpose for him that will manifest in his Jupiter Dasha. Just because the time, let me just go over some quick remedies real quick, and then we'll field some more questions. A lot of you have already heard these remedies, but I just think they're helpful, right? Gemstones, always a great topic of debate for astrology. I loved Dr. Frawley's perspective on it. But one of the things that I understand is that, it's like you're saying, I recognize that Ketu is having an influence on my life, and I want to make Ketu more powerful, right? That's not necessarily going to be a good thing, So there has to be a willingness to confront your samskara if you're going to put a cat's eye on. You're saying, all right? So it's not like, oh, I'm going to put a cat's eye on and Ketu is going to be super nice. No, I'm going to put a Ketu on and I'm willing to face my demons of my unfinished lessons from my past lives. Ketu is the giver of obstacles, so you're empowering energy that can make those challenges in your life even stronger. So when we're talking about remedies here, you're getting closer to fulfilling your karma with Ketu. That might not be materially enjoyable. Ganesh mantra, right? Remover of obstacles with the giver of obstacles, the Ketu Sutra, which we performed earlier. For colors, we wear multicolored and striped clothing. I did this for Ketu today. Ketu is a Pitta planet, so you want to eat a Pitta pacifying diet, especially if it's in houses 6, 8, 12, or ascending, and a Sattvic diet, because Ketu is very Rajasic in its nature. Some herbs that I work with Ketu remedies, and I even think of herbs as more beneficial than gemstones, especially Ayurvedic herbs when you're dealing with planetary remedies, because it literally just helps. So these are all kind of cooling herbs to kind of cool down that intense Rajasic energy. Vidari, Shatavari, Gaduchi, red sandalwood, and Manjista. So some contemporary modern lifestyle practices to improve your karma with Ketu. Vipassana, right? Sensory deprivation, that's a cool thing now. meditation, and visiting an ashram. I like that. Ancestral rituals, honoring the older generations of family, which is different than doing what they tell you to do. And then also with Ketu, giving away belongings, fasting and prayer, really development of that spiritual and religious. So specific to this lesson, before we get into Rahu and finish up, we tap into the Samskara Bhava using the different methods we went on earlier to unlock what the lesson is. If your Samskara evolution level is mastered, like Ketu in its own Nakshatra, then you move away from those karmas to not repeat the same life's previous soul pattern one life to the next. So for example, if Ketu is an Ashwini Nakshatra in the 8th house, you know, there's a huge samskara evolution mastery on the mystical renunciative path. So you kind of want to move away from the renunciation of material things and say, okay, I have these gifts and this wisdom. How can I turn it into be some kind of service, some kind of career, some kind of prosperous thing in this lifetime? Now, if the samskara evolution level is low, you unlock the unfinished business, which is like the bulk remainder of the lesson. So let's say now we have Ketu in Rahu Nakshatra and Ardra in the 7th Bhava. You focus on your interpersonal relationships in your previous lives. But there's a huge amount of unfinished business and lessons in terms of healthy, non-codependent personal relationships. So that's why I say if that kind of position is there, the focus in this lifetime is the development of a non-codependent relationship and marriage would be a huge healing thing. Rahu remedies, Kṣaṇāti, and I wear my Kṣaṇāti around my neck every day and I don't sleep with it, not so Rahu is nicer to me, so Rahu is harder on me. Moldavite is also a nice secondary gem here. I want consequences when I step outside of my dharma, and that's what Rahu is about. The mantra for Durga, Shiva, Rahu Sutra, colors, rust coloration, brownish orange tones, earth tones. Rahu is a windy planet, so you want to eat a vata pacifying diet, but Rahu is very tamasic, so sattvic diet is encouraged here as well. And a lot of like sattvic vata pacifying herbs here, like tulsi, ashwagandha, jatamansi. Rahu is horribly disturbing to sleep. So the jatamansi, which is like the sattvic cousin of valerian root, is going to be really helpful here, as well as Yogaraj Gugalu to get the dryness out of your joints and bones and things like that, and Shilajit, which is a mineral. So contemporary practices, foreign and exotic travel, international travel, new places, domestically new, especially internationally, is going to be beneficial as well. And then mystical spiritual traditions, usually outside of the religion you were born in. But even if it is the religion you were born in, you can experience the mystical, non-dogmatic version of that, right? Even in the Judeo-Christians, you know, in Judaism we have Kabbalah, and in Islam we have, you know, the whirling dervish. There's all sorts of mystical sides of even the Judeo-Christian religions. And shamanism and plant medicine. And then for Rahu remedy, because it likes to escape its experience, sobriety and abstinence from mind-altering substances. This is different than working with a plant medicine under the supervision of a shaman. Okay? Rahu remedies, if your karmic debt evolution level is mastered, Rahu in its own nakshatra, allow yourself to be tested. If true mastery is experienced and karmic debt is fulfilled, return to the position of moksha for your mahasamadhi. For example, if Rahu is in its own nakshatra Swati in the 10th bhava, it could suggest a level of mastery in karmic debt fulfillment in your career. Perhaps this manifests with an international and relocated career in which the native has achieved material success. You know, fame and recognition. So if this is true in such a case, then they should follow Ketu and return to the land that they were born in and renunciate their prosperity and focus on samadhi and spiritual life. If the karmic debt evolution level is low, the native should totally dedicate and prioritize the associated area and aim it focuses on. So this means to allow yourself to be humble. Whenever we're working with Rahu, we really want to humble ourselves and admit that despite wherever your Ketu is placed, that they might want to focus on Ketu's area, and that their debt their debt is with Rahu, that they might want to focus on Ketu's area, but they want to focus on Rahu. Your debt is with Rahu, and they will not experience their maximum soul's evolution unless they dedicate themselves towards the karmic fulfillment of Rahu. Go towards your Rahu with all your heart when your karmic debt evolution level is low, and you will pay off your debt. For example, if Rahu is in Mula Nakshatra in the second house, that's a low debt level evolution, that means that your life has a continued soul pattern of poverty and low material resources, no wealth. So that means that it's natural for you to renunciate money and never have held a job or focused on money, because it's Maya, which is illusion, which is true. But their soul has not experienced Artabhava, and they will continuously reincarnate again and again until they experience some level of growth in Artha, your material prosperity and success. So just some conclusions, and then we went a little bit over. So, right, what time is it?
You're doing really well, actually. You've got another 5 minutes or so.
Okay, perfect. So then we can go over the conclusion here and then field some questions. So in conclusion, the soul cycle, karma, and reincarnation are essential principles of Vedic philosophy and Jyotish. Inseparable. To believe in Jyotish without them, or at least being open-minded to them, is limiting and misses, in my opinion, the point of Jyotish, which is to fulfill our karma and to experience the soul evolution. So again, the point being to align to and achieve Dharmartha Kama Mokshanam, Arogya Mula Mutamam, Rogastasya Paraha Shreyasho Jivatasya Cha. The purpose of life is to achieve the Vedic forms, aims of life. You need an Ayurvedic balance of the doshas in order to be able to do that, so that eventually we can end the cycle of reincarnation and achieve Mahasamadhi. So Ketu can be used specifically to determine the nature and lessons experienced in our previous lives. Our samskar. Depending on the level of evolution, which we've elucidated in these methods, there is an unfinished business in our previous life's lessons, and due to previous focus, creates a karmic debt, which we can see through Rahu's position. Again, 99.9% of the time, complete and total mastery of our samskara is not obtained. So, I mean, maybe there's 1 in 1,000 people that have mastered their samskara. But there's less than 1,000 people in this room. Rahu shows the aim and area of our lives, which yearns to be concentrated on. I mentioned the itch that we need to scratch and to complete our soul cycle. Depending on the karmic debt evolution level, this will either be exciting and come easy to us, or be something we fight against despite it being our soul's evolution. Sometimes our conscious yearning, which is what our mind desires, is very different from what our soul desires. So comparing and contrasting the methods presented here, you can determine the exact approach your client, or maybe even yourself, should have to fulfilling the bulk of their karma, and take a step closer to your maximum at soul's evolution. So understanding Ketu's house sign Nakshatra will show your relationship to your samskar. Rahu's house sign Nakshatra show your relationship to your debt. And through these two aspects, you can fulfill your karma and get closer to samadhi, which is our purpose here. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you all.
You can have some questions, of course, but I just want to let you know that the buffet today is Italian food in honor of you, Kṣaṇāti.
All right, nice. I love pasta. Oh, so I have some cards up here if anyone wants my card with my website, YouTube, and all that.
We as souls just focusing mainly on the areas that are in this particular lifetime's Rahu and Ketu as our lessons, or does that keep repeating through all the lifetimes?
It does keep repeating infinitely through lifetimes until we've mastered both aspects.
Okay, so the Rahu Ketu are really the key to our karmic evolution. We don't go around into different areas. We're just anchored in those two.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
possible, like, so it's, this is a hypothetical thing, but if you, let's say, have mastered how a lesson it wants to teach itself through Rahu and Ketu, let's say it's in your career, right? You've already experienced that. It's possible it'll show up in another area of your life
Oh,
in
okay.
another incarnation.
But it's a similar theme. It's just
Yeah, the lesson
how
is
to
the same, but
put
the-
it through different lenses. and-
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. All right, thank you.
Sure. Oh, go ahead, sir. I got you next.
Thanks. A question about the Gandhantas, as they're like a very psychological point in the chart, and the node is the nodes are very psychological. I'm just curious, like how having like a lunar node in your natal chart placed in the Gandhanta, let's say, and as an example, like in like the last degree of Scorpio with the ascendant, you know, for example, like how would Rahu being there in a Gandhanta point change the individual's experience of Rahu in life and Rahu Mahadasha, for example?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question. It kind of goes similarly to the mean node, true node thing, which is like, okay, the nodes wobble in space. If it's at that endpoint of a sign, moving into the other house, moving into the other sign energetically, we have to entertain that possibility. So in the case of it being in Scorpio and in a Gandhanta point, whatever house that is, you would have to see some of the transitionary energies of what it would mean if that Rahu was there moving into Sagittarius and into the house of the wherever Sagittarius is placed in the chart. Right? In Jyotish, we have to kind of like take those subtleties into effect and see the gray area.
Thank you.
This guy here.
You spoke so eloquently about Amaji, and I have, seen her a few times in the Chicago area. You indicate that she had no more samskaras. Now, I was reading her autobiography, and I was just wondering, her family treated her like SHIT.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, perhaps you could say something about that. Why that is, because the Buddhists will say, before enlightenment you chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment you chop wood and carry water.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering about that.
I love that question. It also makes me think of something my uncle told me, which is an apprentice is with his guru and says, I'm ready to be enlightened. And the guru says, okay, here you go. And he's at holiday dinners with his family. But in that case, when you're looking at someone who, energetically has mastered their samskara, it's the nature of karma that if samskara is mastered, to be tested if you've learned that lesson. So if Amma is truly, which I believe she is, totally unconditionally loving, forgiving in every sense of the word, a representation of love and the Divine Mother, then no matter how poorly she's treated, she loves them. There's this story, actually, that I've read about her, where someone who wanted to assassinate her, her brother, and had a knife, and tried to kill her. And then he got taken down, and he was dying. And then she held him and loved him and sent him into his samadhi directly after that moment.
Then he reincarnated into her sister and lives in the ashram today. Okay.
So, if someone, I think we're all striving for unconditional love, but, until we're tested, do we have any idea?
I'm sorry, that's a good question. Sorry,